Let me make this real simple for you, honey. Turn around, get back in whatever you drove up in, and get lost. This isn't a place for walk-ups." The words came out of the guard shack before the sun had finished clearing the tree line, and they carried across the cold concrete of the entry control point like they owned it. Corporal Brett Sorensen leaned out of the booth window with the easy contempt of a young man who had decided, in the first 2 seconds, exactly how little the woman in front of him was worth. Behind him, the gate of the Marine Special Operations installation came awake in pieces, the Jersey barrier still beaded with dew, the cami netting hanging limp in the windless dawn, the long serpentine of concrete where vehicles would soon stack up. It was 20 minutes past 6 in the morning. The flag at the parade field hung straight down. Sorensen was 22 years old and had been a corporal for 4 months, which is precisely the most dangerous age and rank a man can be. Old enough to have a little authority, young enough to think it is the same thing as importance. He had pulled the dawn shift on the pedestrian lane, the dull post, the one where nothing happened and nobody senior came through, and the boredom of it sat on him like a wet coat. A walk-up contractor was the most interesting thing that had crossed his line all week. He intended to enjoy it. The woman did not get lost. She stood at the pedestrian lane in a plain blue jacket, a temporary visitor's credential clipped to a lanyard at her chest, and she held the badge out to him without a word. She did not argue. She did not step back. She stood with the stillness of someone who had waited out far worse than a boy at a gate, and that stillness was the first thing about her that did not fit. Sorensen took the badge the way a man takes something he intends to mock. He turned it over, held it up, squinted at it with theatrical doubt for the benefit of no one in particular. "Visitor credential," he said. "Temporary. No sponsor escort I can see. You know what we do with walk-up contractors who don't have their paperwork squared away," he smiled. "We make them wait." "I can wait," the woman said. Inside the booth, Gunnery Sergeant Walt Tierney looked up from the log. He had spent 22 years in the Marine Corps, a good portion of it around men who did dangerous work and never talked about it, and something in the woman's bearing registered against Sorensen's read of her like a wrong note in a familiar song. He could not have said what it was. The way she stood, maybe. Weight even on both feet, hands loose at her sides, shoulders level. She was not braced, and she was not slouched. She looked, Tierney thought, like a person who was comfortable being looked at and entirely indifferent to it. He said nothing. It was early, and the corporal was technically doing his job in the worst possible way. The thing about her stillness was that it did not perform anything back at him. Most people, pinned at a gate by a young man with a badge and an attitude, do one of two things. They shrink or they bristle. Both of those gave Sorensen something to push against, something to win. The woman did neither. She simply waited, present and unbothered, the way water waits, and the absence of any handle to grab made him reach harder. "What's a contractor like you even here to do?" Sorensen asked, drawing the question out, glancing sideways to see if anyone was enjoying the show. "Consulting? You here to consult somebody? Tell us how to do our jobs?" "I'm here to look," the woman said. 4 words. Flat. Exact. Offered without heat. Sorensen laughed, because it was easier than understanding them, and tossed the credential onto the counter between them where it skittered to a stop against the logbook. "Stand over there and wait, honey," he said, jerking his chin at a painted yellow line 3 steps to the side. "Behind the line. I'll get to you." The woman picked up her badge. She did not snatch it, and she did not sigh. She stepped to the painted line, and she waited. And in the booth, the gunny's eyes stayed on her for a half-second longer than he meant them to, and then the radio crackled and pulled him back to the day's first problem, and the moment folded itself away. Across the road, beyond the vehicle lane, a dark SUV sat idling at the curb, with 3 men near it, who did not look at the gate, and did not look away from it either. The woman behind the yellow line watched the post wake up. She did not watch it the way a bored civilian watches a line move. She read it. Her eyes traveled the angles without her head turning much at all. The camera bolted high on the light pole, the overwatch position above the gatehouse, the way the vehicle serpentine forced a car to slow and turn and slow again, the blind spot where the barrier met the fence. Her eyes moved the way a gun moves on a slow sweep, not nervous, only thorough, taking inventory of a place the way a person does when reading the ground is a habit older than thought. She noticed the dark SUV across the road. She did not look at it twice. What she was doing had a name, though she had stopped thinking of it as a separate activity a long time ago. She was building the picture. In any space she entered, she built it without willing it. Where the threats could come from, where the cover was, who in the crowd was carrying themselves wrong, how long it would take to get from here to there if here became a place she could not stay. It was a habit the teams had drilled into her, and the years had welded to her bones. And it did not switch off because the setting was a sleepy gate on a stateside post at dawn. It was running now, quietly, the way her heartbeat was running, and what it told her about Corporal Sorensen's gate was not flattering. The overwatch position was unmanned. The camera on the pole was pointed at the vehicles, and not the people. The serpentine was good, but the blind spot at the fence line was bad, and a man with bad intentions and a little patience could have used it. She filed all of it away. She had, after all, come to look. A box truck rolled up to the vehicle lane, and Sorensen's partner, a younger Marine, a lance corporal with a clipboard he held like a prop, waved it forward and stepped to the driver's window and asked for the manifest. He took the paperwork. He glanced in the cab. He walked the length of the truck, peered into the open bed, came back, and waved it through. And the whole time Sorensen leaned in the booth window and watched the woman to make sure she was still waiting. "You cleared the cab before the bed," the woman said quietly. "To no one and to everyone." "That's backwards." Sorensen's head came around. "What?" "You verify the load against the manifest first," she said. "Then the cab. You did it the other way. If the manifest is the lie, you've already let your eyes go where the driver wanted them." She said it the way a person reads a street sign aloud, not correcting, only naming. "Backwards." "Mind your own business," Sorensen said. But Tierney's head had come up again, all the way this time. He stepped to the open door of the booth and looked at the woman at the line, and he looked at the way she stood, and he thought of a master sergeant he had served under a long time ago who used to stand exactly like that at the edge of things, watching everyone, missing nothing, saying almost nothing at all. "Contractors don't stand like that," Tierney said, half to himself, half to the lance corporal beside him. "Stand like what, Gunny?" the lance corporal asked. The gunny didn't answer. He was still looking. He was running back through a memory that did not want to come all the way up. A hangar on a different post, years ago. A knot of operators just back from somewhere they were not allowed to talk about. And the way they had stood around their gear, with that same unhurried, total awareness, present to everything and announcing nothing. You learned, if you spent enough years in the Marine Corps, that the loudest men in any room were almost never the most dangerous ones. The most dangerous ones were quiet, and they were still, and they watched, and they let you talk. The woman behind the yellow line was watching, and she was still, and she was letting a corporal talk, and Walt Tierney's stomach had begun very slowly to sink. Sorensen, for his part, had decided something. Being corrected by a walk-up in front of his post had embarrassed him in the small way that lands hard on a man who has nothing yet but his post and his certainty. And so the woman had stopped being a person and become a problem to be managed. He started, without quite knowing he was doing it, to build the story he would tell later. The difficult contractor, the one who couldn't follow simple instructions, the one he'd had to handle. He needed her to be small, so that handling her would make him large. The woman at the line watched the gate and let him build it. She had absorbed the correction of being told to wait, and the joke about getting lost, and the word, honey, and she had let all of it pass through her without leaving a mark, and that smoothness only made Sorensen more certain there was nothing underneath. He could not have been more wrong, and the only man at the gate who suspected it had just been pulled back inside by another radio call. The buddy drifted over when the vehicle lane went quiet. Lance Corporal Jesse Pruitt came off the vehicle lane, grinning, drawn by the smell of something to laugh at, and he leaned on the booth beside Sorensen and asked what the holdup was. Sorensen told him. He told it well, the way he'd been practicing it in his head. The contractor who showed up on foot with no escort, who'd tried to tell trained Marines how to run their own gate, who was now learning that the gate ran on his clock and not hers. Pruitt looked the woman over and snorted. "Maybe she's lost," he said, loud enough to carry. "You lost, ma'am?" "Senior center's back that way. They do crafts on Tuesdays." The woman said nothing. It is a particular kind of cruelty, the kind two young men make together, because each of them is performing for the other, and neither of them would have gone so far alone. Alone, Sorensen might have run the badge and waved her through and forgotten her by lunch. Alone, Pruitt would never have spoken to a stranger that way. But together, they had an audience of one another, and the audience kept raising the price of stopping, because stopping now would mean admitting that the last few minutes had been beneath them, and neither boy had the courage that admission required. So they kept going, not because they were monsters, but because they were young and weak in the specific way that makes young men dangerous to people who cannot fight back. The two of them built a joke between them then, the way two boys in fresh camis will, each line a little louder than the last, because the silence on the other end gave them nothing to push against. They called her the walk-up. They called her honey again. They wondered aloud, laughing, whether she'd wandered off from a tour group, whether she even knew what kind of place she was standing in front of. And the woman at the line let them build it, the way you let a fire burn down to where it can be stepped on. A junior Marine passing through the pedestrian lane on his way to morning chow slowed, took in the situation with the quick read of someone who'd rather not be involved, and offered, half to be kind and half to make it stop, to run the lady's credential up to the pass office himself. It would have taken him 4 minutes. "I've got it handled," Sorensen said, waving him off without looking at him. He did not have it handled. He had not run the credential at all. He had simply decided to keep her waiting on principle, because the waiting was the point now, and the junior Marine shrugged and moved on, and the simple fix walked away with him. Tierney came back out of the booth. He saw the two of them leaning there, laughing at the woman behind the line, and his jaw tightened in a way the Lance Corporal beside him had learned to be afraid of. "Corporal," the gunny said, "run that badge through the system. Properly. Right now." "I'll get to it, gunny," Sorensen said. "When I get to it." It was a small insolence, the kind that lives in the gap between an order and its execution, and Tierney filed it away with the cold patience of a senior Marine who knows that some lessons have to arrive on their own schedule. In another minute, he would have made it an order with teeth, would have walked the badge to the pass office himself, would have ended the whole stupid morning with the weight of his rank. He had every intention of doing exactly that. But his unease had become something with edges now. He looked at the woman one more time, at the calm that was too deep to be ordinary, and he felt the first real cold finger of a thought he could not yet finish. If you have ever watched the young forget what the quiet ones once paid, stay with this one, and subscribe to the Veteran Vault. Behind the line, the woman shifted her weight once, settled it again, and watched as Corporal Sorensen reached for the next, harder idea. He found it in the credential itself. Sorensen picked the badge back up off the counter, held it to the strengthening light, and turned it slowly. And then he announced, to Pruitt, to the booth, to the small line of people that had begun to form behind the woman, that the thing was a fake. "I've seen these printed in a garage," he said, with the confidence of a man who had never once seen one printed anywhere. "You want to tell me where you really got this? Or do we do this the hard way?" The credential was not, of course, a fake. It was a perfectly valid temporary visitor's badge, issued through the post's own system, and a single query against that system would have returned a sponsor and a clearance and a name that would have stopped Corporal Sorensen's heart. He had simply chosen not to run it, because running it was the boring, correct, humble thing, and humility was not on the menu this morning. He had built a story in which she was a fraud, and a man committed to a story will avoid, at almost any cost, the one simple action that might prove the story wrong. "Run the credential," the woman said. "It will tell you everything you need." She said it level, without urgency, the way a person hands someone a key to a door they keep trying to break down. It was the third time she had offered him the simple, true thing that would end it. It was the third time he refused, because the simple, true thing did not feed the story, and the story had become the only thing he wanted. "Pruitt," Sorensen said, "get the watch on the radio. Tell them we've got somebody trying to get on the installation with a counterfeit credential. Tell them to send somebody to hold her while we sort this out." He was talking over her now, enjoying the architecture of it, the official words, the audience. He had stopped seeing her as a woman at all. She had become a thing that was happening to him, a thing he was narrating. Behind the woman, the small line of cars and walk-ups had grown, and the people in it had sensed the friction at the front and were doing what people do, looking at their phones, looking at the sky, looking anywhere but at the place where a young man in uniform had decided to be right at someone else's expense. No one wants to be near a young man who has decided to be right. The woman stood alone at the line by the crowd's quiet choice, and she did not look alone, and that too was wrong, if anyone had been reading her. Across the road, someone was reading her. Master Sergeant Rafe Okafor came off the fender of the SUV without seeming to hurry. He was a broad, unremarkable man in a plain jacket and a ball cap, and he straightened off the vehicle the way a cat comes off a wall, all of it economy, none of it noise. His orders were to observe. They had been to observe since the colonel had told them, an hour ago, that she wanted to walk up to her own gate cold, with no rank and no warning, and see what kind of post she was inheriting. "Observe and don't intervene," she had said, "unless I'm in danger." Okafor had not loved the order. He had been keeping people like Colonel Quinlan alive for the better part of 2 decades, and every instinct he owned objected to standing across a road while a stranger raised his voice at his principal. But he also understood what she was doing, because he had watched her do versions of it before. She did not believe a report about a place. She believed her own eyes. She had told him, in the SUV, that you could learn more about a unit in 10 minutes at its gate than in 10 hours of briefings, because the gate was where a command's real character lived, its discipline or its laziness, its respect or its contempt, all of it on display in how it treated the least important person who walked up. She had come to read her new regiment's character. She was, Okafor thought grimly, getting an extremely clear reading. Okafor watched the corporal step out of the booth. He watched the young man's body language change, the squaring of the shoulders, the closing of the distance, the way a person's hands get ready before the person admits to themselves what the hands are getting ready to do. Okafor recalculated the threshold, the way he had recalculated thresholds on 5 continents, and he found it closer than it had been a minute ago. He did not move yet, but the 2 men beside him had read the same thing he had, and the three of them had gone from leaning to standing without a signal passing between them. Sorensen stepped down out of the booth and onto the concrete, into the woman's space, close enough now that the next thing would not be a word. And across the road, three men in plain clothes went very still in the particular way that is not stillness at all, but the half-breath before motion. Gunnery Sergeant Tierney saw it from the booth, and he moved. He came across the lane fast for a man his size and put a hand flat on the booth rail between the corporal and the woman, not quite touching either of them, the way you put a hand near a fire without putting it in. "Corporal," he said, and there was nothing easy in his voice now. "Step back. Run the badge. Right now. You do not know who you're talking to." It was the oldest warning in the world, the one every senior man eventually says to every young one, and Sorensen did exactly what young men have always done with it. He heard it as a challenge to his authority in front of his audience, and he could not afford, in that moment, in front of Pruitt and the growing line, to look like a man who could be told what to do by anyone, even his own sergeant of the guard. "I've got this, Gunny," Sorensen said, and he turned his shoulder, actually turned it, a small, contemptuous quarter turn that put his back half to the senior Marine. Contractors don't get to skip the line just because they've got an attitude. Tierney's face did something complicated and quiet. The corporal had just crossed a second line, one that had nothing to do with the woman. He had brushed off his own chain in front of junior Marines, and that was a debt that would come due no matter how the morning ended. But the gunny did not have room to deal with that now, because he was looking at the woman, fully, up close, for the first time. And up close, he saw all of it. He saw the stillness that was not patience, but discipline. He saw the eyes that had already, he understood now, mapped every exit from this gate, every angle, every man, and where his hands were. He saw a person who was letting this happen, who could have stopped it with a sentence, and was choosing, for reasons he couldn't fathom, to let a foolish boy walk all the way to the edge of the cliff he'd picked. "Son," Tierney said, very low, leaning toward Pruitt because Sorensen had stopped listening. "People who stand like that have done things you and I only read about. I have seen exactly 2 people stand like that in my whole career, and I saluted both of them." Pruitt's grin was gone. He didn't know what the gunny meant exactly, but he had caught the temperature of it. What Tierney could not have known, but had begun to feel in the animal part of his brain, was that he was watching a confrontation whose outcome had already been decided and was only waiting to arrive. The woman at the line was not in danger, and had never been in danger. The danger was all flowing the other direction, gathering across the road in 3 men with quiet hands, pooling at the corporal's feet, while he stood in it and mistook it for a puddle. There is a particular helplessness in being the one person in a scene who can see the cliff coming and cannot make the man at the wheel slow down. Tierney had been a Marine for 22 years, and he had never once felt it as sharply as he felt it now, standing 6 feet from a boy who would not stop talking long enough to be saved. Across the lot, the 3 men had begun to walk. They came on unhurried and spread wide, the way men move when they have done it 1,000 times and want to give a situation no single point to focus on. 1 wide left, 1 wide right, Okafor up the center, all of it casual, all of it converging. The woman saw them coming. She gave the smallest movement of her head, barely a shake, a tempo command, as clear to them as a shout. Not yet. They slowed. They did not stop. The distance closed by halves. What the boy in the fresh camis did not know was what the next 90 seconds were about to teach him. And you will want to be subscribed to the veteran vault when it does. Sorensen's hand started to come up toward the woman's arm. 15 years before a boy told her to get lost at a gate, she had been the last one off a ridge at 3 o'clock in the morning, 8,000 feet up a mountain on the far side of the world, with 2 hostages alive behind her and one of her own Marines gone. It was the autumn of 2011. She was a captain then, and the ground force commander, and the call sign the teams used for her had not yet been fixed to her for good. The helicopters had set them down on a saddle of frozen scree below the compound, rotor wash tearing at everything, and they had moved up the slope in the dark, with the cold burning in their lungs at that altitude, and they had done the thing they had come to do. The team had been chosen for it, because of who they were and what they could do, but more than that, because of how they thought, and she had been the one they put in charge of the ground, because she was the calmest mind they had when minds came apart. The intelligence had been thin, and the window had been short. 2 aid workers, a man and a woman, both of them civilians who had come to that part of the world to dig wells and vaccinate children, had been taken off a road and held for ransom, and then for something worse, and the people holding them had picked a compound high enough and remote enough that they believed no one would come. They were wrong about that, in the specific way that people are wrong when they have never met the kind of person who comes anyway. She would not, in the years after, describe the inside of the compound to anyone. The breach, the rooms, the recovery of the 2 aid workers who had been held there for 19 days. She kept all of it folded away where the daylight did not reach. What she kept where she could find it was the voice she had used on the radio, calm in a way she had not felt, because the calm was the job and the men were listening. A leader's fear is contagious, and so is a leader's steadiness, and on the worst nights, she had learned to give her people the second one, no matter what was happening inside her own chest. "We don't leave until everyone's accounted for," she had said on the net, with the wind trying to take the words. Everyone. Say again. Everyone comes off this mountain. It was on the way down that they lost Sergeant Caleb Roan. The brake contact had taken them across a ridge strung with old wire, and the enemy had the high ground behind them, and in the worst stretch of it, in the dark and the noise, Roan was killed. He was 26 years old. He had a habit of humming when he checked his gear, an old country song his father used to play, and the team had given him grief about it for 2 deployments, and they would have given anything, every one of them, to hear it one more time. He had been on her left when it happened, moving well, doing everything right. And then the night had taken him the way the night sometimes does, suddenly and without permission, and there had been no time to feel it, because there were still 2 civilians to get down a mountain and the rest of the team to keep alive. She had felt it later. She felt it still. She carried him. She would not leave him on the wire, and so she carried him down the last of the mountain herself, refusing the hands that offered to spell her, taking him over her shoulders the way you carry a man you have decided will not be left behind, no matter what it costs your own body. And she came down off that ridge at first light, carrying more than her kit, and she had carried it every single day since. There is a kind of weight that does not get lighter when you set it down, because you never really set it down. You only learn to walk with it. She had spent 15 years learning to walk with Caleb Roan, and she would spend the rest of them at it, and she had made her peace with that, because the alternative, to have left him, to have come down that mountain lighter, was a thing she could not have lived with at all. The medal they gave her later, the silver star, the citation, the ceremony with the dress blues and the words read aloud. She accepted the way you accept a weight you did not ask for. It lived in a drawer. The thing it stood for lived in her. Back inside the wire, a grizzled old team chief who had seen everything had looked at her, sitting alone with her knees drawn up and her eyes 1,000 miles away, and he had crossed to her and crouched down and said the thing that stuck. "Gray came down the mountain," he said. "Came down, out of all that gray, with everybody, even the one we couldn't save. From now on, Captain, you're Grey Wolf. The teams do not let you name yourself. The name finds you on the worst night, doing the thing that is hard, and then it belongs to you, whether you want it or not. Grey Wolf was hers because of a mountain and a boy named Roan, and that was why, in 15 years, she had never once said it for effect, never used it to win a room, never let it out of her mouth to make a small man feel small. It was not a trophy. It was a debt with a name on it. The memory closed, the way it always did, on a folded flag handed across to a mother in a quiet room, and on the name carved into a wall she visited when she could, Caleb Roan. And then the world snapped back to a cold concrete gate at 20-some minutes past 6 in the morning, where a corporal's hand was reaching for her arm. He took hold of it. Sorensen's hand closed on her upper arm the way you take hold of something you have already decided does not matter, and he started to pull, to march her off the line toward the holding area, narrating it as he went. "All right, that's enough. You're coming with me until we figure out who you really are." There were, the woman knew, a great many things she could do with a hand that had closed on her arm. The teams had taught her most of them, and the years had taught her the rest, and the nearest of them would have left Corporal Sorensen on the concrete, wondering how the sky had gotten where the ground used to be, before he had finished his sentence. She catalogued the options the way you notice the exits in a room, automatically, without intending to use any of them. She had not struck a person in anger in 20 years. She did not intend to start with a frightened boy at a gate who had no idea the size of the mistake his hand was making. The woman did not pull away. She let his hand stay there for exactly one breath. She looked down at it, at the young fingers wrapped around the sleeve of her blue jacket, and then she looked up at his face, and the temperature of her stillness changed. It was not fear, it was not anger. It was something colder and far more certain than either. The quiet of a person who has been in rooms this boy would not survive and has decided, even now, even here, to give him one more chance to choose differently. "You don't want your hand there, Corporal," she said. She said it the way you would warn someone off a live wire, not a threat, a fact about the world he was about to learn. Beside the booth, Pruitt took half a step back. He had caught up finally to the things Sorensen hadn't, the way the air had gone wrong, and his hands came open at his sides. And from across the lot, flat and carrying and absolutely without hurry, came Okafor's voice. "Corporal?" It was one word, and it did something to the morning. The three men crossed the last of the distance fast. Sorensen, still gripping her arm, turned toward the sound of running feet, and found himself ringed on every side. They took the corners around him without touching him. It happened in perhaps 2 seconds, and it was the most disciplined violence Tierney had ever seen that involved no violence at all. One man wide to Sorensen's left, one wide to his right, a third at his back, and Master Sergeant Okafor planted directly in front of him. 4 points of a box, drawn around a single corporal, close enough that he could feel the heat off them, controlled enough that not one hand was laid on him. There was nowhere to step. There was nowhere to turn that did not put his face a foot from a man who was looking at him with no expression at all. It was the discipline of it that frightened Sorensen most, when he was able, much later, to think about it at all. Not the speed, though they had been fast. Not the size of them, though they were not small men. It was that no one had touched him. There had been no shove, no grab, no shouted command, nothing he could later tell himself had been unfair or excessive. 4 men had simply appeared at the 4 points of the compass around him, and stopped, and stood, and looked at him with the patient, neutral attention of professionals who had already decided exactly what they would do if he made the next thing necessary, and were entirely at peace with doing it. It was the calm that broke him. He had been performing certainty for 10 minutes. Now he was standing in the middle of the real thing, and the real thing did not perform at all. Sorensen's hand came off the woman's arm on its own, the way a hand comes off a stove. Okafor did not look at the corporal again. He looked at the woman, and his voice changed entirely, the flatness falling away into something careful and warm. "Colonel," he said. "Are you all right, ma'am?" The word landed on the gate like a dropped plate. "I'm fine, Master Sergeant," she said. "Stand them down." But Okafor had one more thing to do, and he did it deliberately, turning his head so the frozen gate could hear it, so the corporal could hear it, so it would land where it needed to land. "This is Grey Wolf," he said evenly. "Incoming commander, Marine Raider Regiment. She takes the colors Thursday." Gunnery Sergeant Tierney came to attention so hard and so fast that the sound of his heels was the loudest thing at the gate. "Ma'am," Tierney said, and his voice was not entirely steady, the voice of a man whose oldest instinct had just been proven right in the worst possible way. "Gunnery Sergeant Tierney, Sergeant of the Guard. I'm sorry, ma'am. I should have moved sooner. That's on me." "You moved, Gunny," she said quietly. "You said the words. He didn't hear them. That part's not on you." There was a commotion at the edge of the lot then. A vehicle door, fast footsteps, and Lieutenant Colonel Grant Maddox, the post commander, came across the concrete at a near run with his cover in his hand, having been raised on the radio with 3 words that had put ice in his stomach. He saw the box of plainclothes operators. He saw his own sergeant of the guard at rigid attention, and he saw the woman in the plain blue jacket, and he stopped dead, 6 feet short, as recognition hit him like a wave. "Colonel Quinlan," he said. All down the line, the Marines who understood what was happening came to attention, and the ones who didn't understand came to attention because everyone else had, and the whole entry control point stiffened into stillness around the woman a corporal had told to get lost. Sorensen stood in the center of his box and watched his own certainty die in stages. It moved across his face the way weather moves across a field. First, the confusion. The badge, the contractor, the joke, none of it adding up. Then the disbelief, the desperate reach for some version of the last 10 minutes in which he had not done what he had just done. Then the recognition, cold and total, as the words arranged themselves into a sentence with him at the center of it. "Incoming commander, Raider Regiment," and I had her by the arm. And then the horror, the real thing, the bottom dropping out, as the boy understood at last, whose sleeve his fingers had been wrapped around. There is a moment when a person has done something they cannot undo, where the whole architecture of their self-image comes down at once, and it is not a pleasant thing to watch, even when the person has earned it. Sorensen had built himself, over 22 years and 4 months as a corporal, into a man who was sharp and squared away and not to be trifled with, a man who held the line, and in the space of a single sentence spoken across a parking lot, that man had been revealed as a bully who had laid hands on the most decorated officer he was ever likely to meet, in front of his sergeant of the guard, his post commander, and a woman's protective detail who had been one bad decision away from putting him on the ground. Everything he had thought he was lay in pieces on the concrete at his feet, and he had broken it himself, with his own hand, on his own gate. "Ma'am," Sorensen said. The word came out of him barely louder than the idle of the SUV. "Ma'am, I didn't—" He didn't finish. There was no end to the sentence that would help him. The woman he had told to get lost looked at him for a long, level moment, and the only sounds at the gate were the idle of the engine and the wind that had finally come up off the parade field, lifting the flag on its pole at last, and the small, wet noise of a young man swallowing around a fear he had earned. Lieutenant Colonel Maddox found his voice first. "Corporal, you are relieved," Maddox said, and the words came fast and hard. "Step away from the colonel. Gunnery Sergeant, get another Marine on this post. Corporal Sorensen, you will report to me directly, and you had best believe we are going to have a long conversation about what just happened at my gate. The laying of hands on a senior officer, the failure to verify a credential, the disregard of a lawful order from your sergeant of the guard. He was building it into a list, each item heavier than the last, the architecture of a young Marine's worst week. "Lieutenant Colonel." Quinlan said it quietly, and Maddox stopped. She stepped out of the loose ring of her own men, who melted backward at a glance from Okafor, and she crossed the few feet of concrete to stand in front of Corporal Sorensen herself, not as a thing that was happening to him now, but as a person, finally, looking at another person. "He's a young Marine who got the wrong lesson somewhere," she said. "Somebody taught him that the uniform is a thing you point at people instead of a thing you carry for them. That's a failure, but it's a teachable one, and ending him over a bad morning doesn't fix the thing that made the morning." She held Maddox's eyes. "Teach him the right lesson. Don't end him over it. That's not a request I'm dressing up as an order. It's how I'd like my gate run, with the door open for a man to become better than his worst 10 minutes. Then she turned back to Sorensen, and her voice dropped, and it was only for him. "You don't know who's walking up to your gate," she said. "That's the entire point of the gate. The next quiet person you decide is nobody might be exactly the somebody you spend the rest of your life wishing you'd treated like a human being. Today, that person was your incoming commander. Tomorrow, it'll be somebody with no rank at all who deserves the same respect anyway. Do you understand me, Corporal?" "Yes, ma'am," Sorensen said. His eyes were wet, and he was not bothering to hide it. "Yes, ma'am, I understand." "Good," she said. "Then we don't have a problem. We have a Marine who learned something." She let that sit a moment, and then she did the thing that the men around her would talk about for far longer than the part where her detail boxed a corporal in. She put out her hand. Sorensen stared at it, not understanding, and then he understood, and he took it, and she shook the hand of the young man who had told her to get lost, as if they were meeting for the first time at a better moment. "Colonel Quinlan," she said, "I'll see you on this gate again. Run the badge next time, Corporal. Run it on the 4-star, and run it on the kid with no rank at all. Same way. Every time." "Yes, ma'am," he managed. Lieutenant Colonel Maddox watched this with the expression of a man rearranging on the spot several things he had believed about command. He had come across that lot ready to end a corporal's career, and he had been correct to come ready, and the woman who actually outranked everyone present had just shown him a harder and better thing to do with the same authority. He filed it away. He would, he suspected, be filing away a great deal in the months to come, with this one taking his regiment. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Subscribe to the veteran vault, and let this story find the people who need to hear it. On Thursday, the regiment stood in formation on the parade field under a hard blue sky, and Colonel Mara Quinlan took the colors of the Marine Raiders in her dress blues, and for the first time in a long time, the decorations were where everyone could see them. The silver star, the bronze star, with its small bronze V, the purple heart, the ribbons that stood for mountains and ridgelines, and 19 days, and a sergeant named Roan. She stood very still while the citation of the change of command was read, still in the way that had unsettled a gunnery sergeant at a gate, and somewhere in the ranks, a sergeant of the guard stood a little straighter for having known it when it mattered. There were men in that formation who had served with her, who had been on other mountains and other rooftops, and they watched her take the colors with the quiet pride of people who knew exactly what the ribbons on her chest had cost, and exactly how little she had ever spoken of them. And there were men in that formation who had not, who knew her only as a name and a reputation, and the story of the gate had already reached them, the way stories reach a unit, faster than any order, carrying its own meaning. By the time she took command, every Marine on that field had heard some version of the morning a corporal told the incoming commander to get lost and live to learn better, and the lesson inside it had done more to introduce her to her regiment than any speech could have. They understood, before she said a word from the podium, what kind of commander they were getting. One who came to the gate herself. One who watched. One who would carry them, every one, off whatever mountain came next. She spoke briefly when it was her turn, as she did everything briefly. She did not mention the gate. She mentioned Caleb Roan. She told them that the regiment's whole reason for being could be found in a single sentence she had said once on a radio on the worst night of her life, that everyone comes home, everyone, and that she expected them to make it true, and to make it true for the people who could not fight for themselves. And then she was done, and the field was silent, and the flag she had finally let the wind take stood out straight against the hard blue sky. The mornings after went back to being mornings, and on one of them, a few weeks on, Corporal Brett Sorensen was back on the line at the pedestrian lane, chastened and quieter, and, the gunny had noticed, faster now to run a badge and slower to decide who mattered. A dark sedan rolled up his lane in the early light. He saw who was in the back seat, and Corporal Sorensen came to attention and rendered a salute that was clean and sharp and held a beat longer than regulation required, an apology with no words in it, because the words had already been said. In the back seat, the woman he had once told to get lost looked at him and returned the salute and gave him a small nod, the kind that settles a debt and asks for nothing more. And her car rolled on through the gate and onto the post that was hers now, carrying, as it always did, the name of a young Marine off a mountain who never got to grow old, and the quiet weight of a promise that everyone comes off the mountain. Everyone, even the ones you have to carry. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.